Want me to talk?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're just waiting for one more subcommittee member to join to get started. We'll get started in just a minute or two.
Can you give me a little bit of a reminder of how the process and how these things have been going?
Yes, and today's will be a little different.
Okay.
Because the way that well, maybe we should just go ahead and get started and then I'll go through the agenda.
Okay.
And we'll cover that. Did one of you contact?
I texted Laura, but she has her phone silent, so.
Oh, okay. Anyway, well, we'll get started. So this is the working group CCAP update workshop meeting for the energy supply. And so the way that these meetings have been working, hi, Laura, welcome. The way that, so we're doing 4 of these meetings total. The way that the other ones the way that they've been working is that we kind of start, well, first we start with just a discussion of the information that I provided in the memo, which is like the funding opportunities, some of the background data, and any relevant statewide policies. And then we had been holding time in each workshop, just like 15 minutes or so because before the workshop, the people who are participating have been sending in their new action ideas. So we've been spending like just like a 5 to 10 minute portion in the beginning, reviewing any of those new proposed actions, and then having one last opportunity to add any additional new actions. And then after that, we're really just going through and walking through each of the new actions one by one and discussing each one and make sure we're kind of all aligned on it. And the discussion has kind of covered everything to try to get that action into a final, into what the group would like to recommend. For this one, Lauren and Laura reviewed the memo and both separately had thought that they didn't have any new actions to propose to begin with. Really, they thought that it was a pretty comprehensive list that we had to start with. So we wanted to spend the time on this topic, just refining the existing actions rather than doing the new one. So that's where this one's just different, just because we're not going to do that first step. We're going to start with our existing CCAP actions.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll do today is we'll just do the quick background data and policies and funding sources. And then we have the majority of the time really to just walk through each of those actions and then just kind of talk in real time and discuss how we want them to be refined. And then if we have time at the end, doing a quick prioritization exercise where we just hear from each of you which 1, 2, or 3 actions are your top priorities, not to officially prioritize those, but just to give me a little bit of information to just get a gauge on like what is coming up as the most important for you guys.
Okay.
And then that's what we've been doing. And then, so what we have found that we haven't really, because it's so hard to kind of wordsmith in the moment together, rather than try to come up with the finalized language here today and vote on that today, what we've been doing instead is just discussing each of the actions. I'm taking notes, and then we don't need to vote on anything today, but I'll go back and then propose edited actions based on the discussion today and then send them back to you. And then what we'll do is in September, we're going to review all 4 sectors at once at the full ECC meeting. And that's when the whole group will just vote on them. So we're not needing each working group to like vote right now on the actions just because we weren't able to get them like truly in final form. So we can have that, we'll be able to just have that discussion and finalize all of them in September. And we'll have a chair, vice chair meeting next week to talk about the September meeting and how we want to do that. So that's what today will be. And we also will start, hello, welcome. Are you here to watch the Community Climate Action Plan meeting? Okay, perfect. You can take a seat in any of the chairs along the wall.
ECC group, right?
It is, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know for sure if I was committed and I didn't know how to pre-register.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. So it's a public meeting. You're allowed to come and attend anywhere you'd like. And this room's a little different. So typically, we often will do public meetings in our in the council chambers, but because these are small groups, we've been holding them in some
We
of.
have a working group, you know, the whole.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we're doing it in the small group. Thank you so much.
This year and if you want to know anything about me.
Well, yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, we'd love to hear since you're, since it's a small entity.
I'm Emily Marley House, and I guess if I'm representing anybody today is 350 to shoots, or you, in other environmental groups. We're very interested in moving beyond fossil fuels and, pushing forward with electrification.
Okay,
So that's my simple intro.
okay, perfect. Well, thank you for
Nice to meet you.
joining.
Yeah.
Nice to
Thanks for
meet you. And we don't have, I guess, just for your info as we go through this, we don't have planned any sort of formal public comment. If things come up as we're talking that you'd like to share, I think it would, I think it'd probably be best to still hold them until the end, if that's okay.
I'll just, you know.
Take some notes, yeah.
Yeah, but we will try to, plan a few minutes at the end. If you'd like to make any comments would be great.
And just a little bit, are you meeting with parametrics tomorrow?
That's an entirely separate project. That's not, it's related to this.
Aren't they doing some research? And
Yeah, we're working with,
proposal for the electrification.
yes, but we're not talking about the electrification project today. We're talking about the community climate action plan update. So they're related. You'll hear us, I'm sure you'll hear the group refer to it. Yeah, so tomorrow we are having, like a background research meeting with parametrics. Yeah.
And are you still taking comments on it?
We are not currently taking comments on that project. We will in the future. We have extended an invite to 350 to shoots to participate in a stakeholder interview, which we're trying to get scheduled right now. We just,
Not for tomorrow, it'll be a different day.
that's not tomorrow's. Yeah, that'll be a different day.
Okay, so I've gotten all this different information.
I know, it's confusing. It is confusing because they're closely
They're
related.
very related, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, but you are meeting with them tomorrow.
Yes, well, we meet with them regularly. We meet with them every other week on that project.
Have they been working on it for a while?
A couple of months. I would really like to get our focus back on this topic. Yeah, 'cause we're
But
like to get through.
that.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Just
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick roll call. So today for this group, we have Laura,
Present.
Lauren,
Present.
and Neil.
Present.
Great. So now we'll quickly review some of the background data relevant to the energy supply sector. Okay, so the first of,
Before we jump totally in,
yeah,
I need to get my dog to a vet appointment at 4:15, so I might need to check out just like 5 or 10 minutes.
okay, that sounds good. Yeah, no worries, go whenever you need to.
It's fine. I forgot the in-person meeting buffer,
Right, that whole.
hence being late.
Okay, so the two really significant statewide policies related to the energy supply sector is the Oregon Clean Energy Targets, which were established by Council 2021. So that's the one that says electric utilities are required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity they provide. With the ultimate target of being 100% emission free by 2040, with there are interim targets for 2030 and 2035. We're supposed to be 80% carbon emission free by 2030. And then the other big one is climate protection program, which was, I believe, established through Executive Order 2004, or that was kind of the policy direction for it from the DEQ, and it is establishing regulations that require fossil fuel companies to reduce emissions substantially too. So we have kind of both the two big energy sectors covered by emissions targets. The climate protection program, as I think all of you are familiar, was invalidated in December of 2023, but it's currently under rulemaking to kind of reestablish the program. And
Public comment is open.
that's great. My understanding is that the expectation is that the emissions goals will remain the same. So I think we expect the impact of that program to be similar to what we were kind of thinking it would be based on the last program. And then some of the funding opportunities, not a complete list, but just a couple of ones related to clean energy. These are funding opportunities that are like things that the city can apply for to basically build renewable energy projects, and there is Pacific Power Blue Sky grants. We've received that in the past. We'll be going for that one next year for our Juniper Ridge Public Works campus. The Oregon Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, we received one of those for Juniper Ridge, and we're awaiting our next application on that for the battery storage at Juniper Ridge. My understanding is that they're hoping to refund that program, so it does carry on.
Can the city apply for multiple grants within a window? Or is it just like one?
For the CREP, I think
Yes.
you could do multiple projects.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think you could. We did one planning grant and one construction grant at the same time, but for like the same project
Yeah.
basically. But I think if we were doing like Juniper Ridge and then we had a whole other project, I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may not decide to fund all of them, but
Right.
you
Sure.
could, yeah, there's nothing that's not like you
Yeah.
can only,
But you could
You can only-
yeah, like maybe one of them scores, like if you're not really sure which one might have a better shot, you could do both, I guess. It would maybe be like, anyway. There's also the application part of it itself can be cumbersome, so that would be probably, part of the equation for. Energy Trust of Oregon offers something called project development funds where they can pay, in the past, it's been up to 50%. It's 50% up to a certain dollar amount for certain renewable energy projects. They helped fund our in-conduit hydro study that we did. And they've indicated that they think we'd be able to use those same funds to actually fund a portion of those projects too. So I think that can be pretty broadly available. And then the Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities Grant is a federal grant that also can be used for renewable energy projects if they have a direct resilience application. So we did apply for that one as well for in-conduit hydro project among some other things at the Outback facility, and we weren't awarded it, but we're going to continue trying to refine that application. So I think there's more, but those were just the ones that were kind of
to send you that one that I mentioned.
quickly available. And then this doesn't include, in the energy efficiency group, we had talked about funds that might not be available directly to the city, but the city can help direct funds and get them in the hands of community members. Probably some of those would apply here. I mean, just energy trust incentives and things like that. Have them listed.
Solar for all.
And solar for all being one of them. Yeah, exactly.
We didn't talk about that one as part of the greenhouse gas reduction fund
Mhm,
last week.
mhm.
Did local governments do the direct pay tax thing, or is that only nonprofits?
No, we can. Yes.
Okay.
I'm hoping to do that for the solar at Juniper Ridge.
Mhm.
I should have put that down here. Yeah.
What's that?
So the IRA tax credits for solar and wind, if you're an entity that doesn't have a tax
Mm, right.
obligation, there's this direct pay option, which sounds like the rules are a little complicated,
Yeah.
to actually like make it work, but in theory, you should be able to get that effective discount on your solar through the direct pay,
Yeah.
even though you don't have tax
Right.
liability.
But then, they send it to you as like a tax refund, basically.
Mhm.
And it's a pretty substantial amount.
30%.
Yeah, we're working through, I think we still have some questions about if we meet all the requirements and that
Right.
sort of thing. And it's been confusing to figure out, but we have a little,
Heard, yeah, through the grapevine that people trying to use it have found it
Yeah.
difficult. But
the first project that would make sense for us to go after it for is the Juniper Ridge Solar, which won't be installed till next year. So we have to sort of hang until next year to figure it out. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or just things you want to add about the policy and funding opportunities?
I think the only other thing to look into there's this one I will send you again that is DOE has that's like to help communities with renewable planning. Then the national labs also have a number of grants that's like on the analysis side that we could also apply for.
Okay, yeah.
I'll just make notes and I can send them.
Are you referring to like the C2C cohort
Like
initiative?
thing, yeah.
Mhm.
There's that on-
Yeah, and I haven't seen funding associated with that. I've seen this sort of cohort technical assistance model. Have you seen specific funds from?
Well, I think what C2C actually talked to someone there last week, they have funding that's associated with it.
Do you have to be a member? Do you have to be?
Yeah, like once you get in the cohort, they'll
Okay.
like there's funding associated with it, and then I think like a pipeline to more funding
Okay, that's helpful to know.
in there.
We did apply.
I don't know how much it is, but
We applied and they did not select us, but we'll keep opportunities out for, if they open that back up again. Yeah.
all right.
I did not think of this when I reviewed it, but, and this would apply for the energy efficiency sector too. We have workforce actions in here and we haven't listed any of the workforce funding programs. 'Cause I
Yeah.
know, we looked into this at one point in the energy working group. The state does have some federal funding.
Okay.
for Workforce
That's
development
great.
programs,
Mhm.
and I could track down the notes I put together on that.
Okay, that's good. I wasn't even really, those weren't even necessarily
I-
on my radar, so I'll look for
Yeah.
them. But if you find just notes or even just like
Yeah.
a link to, if you can find the programs and you want to send them, that would be great. That's really good to know about.
Yeah, I feel like we think about like the projects, but like, I think there are, it
Yeah.
may have only been the ones that Odo got. I don't know what other workforce funding there is, but. Yeah, that's a whole other category.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, similarly, there's the whole category that you mentioned of like other incentives for things other than like city projects.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it seems like most of the incentives that we're talking about are usually pretty agnostic. If it was like, I know some of the goals are written specifically about, I guess it's solar and other generations, but like the biodigester, inline hydro, a lot of those are the same funding source, but sometimes there's others like with resilience
Yeah.
component, then it opens up another category, or some of those other pieces might have other spaces. But I'm thinking more on the like residential and commercial side of things of encouraging that project, that those funding sources could just maybe be referenced as like a category
For sure. Yeah.
kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I included it in the energy and buildings like memo, and well, I guess I did include it in this memo, the ETO incentives, just not other one.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. And then just reviewing some of the data that we have, this is just the summary chart we have about how much emissions, contribute, to the different sectors with, which energy supply kind of feeds into several of them. But you guys have seen this with buildings being about 50%, transportation being 44%, and then waste and industrial process and product use being the last 5%. These next two graphs are the same ones we looked at with the energy and buildings group. It shows how much, this one's electricity and the trends in electricity, just consumption between 2016 and 2021. Broken down by commercial on the left and residential on the right, and industrial's the small one in the middle. So electricity use on the residential side went up a little bit, but that's total consumption. And then commercial went down a little bit. And then the natural gas, one shows that commercial natural gas consumption went down quite a bit and residential went up a little bit. And this is, since it's 2021, assuming there's probably some lingering COVID impacts of that, which maybe can explain why the commercial went down so much more. And then potentially transferred some of that to residential when people were, more activities taking place in homes.
Mhm.
That would just be my guess looking at this data, but we don't know for sure what drives that.
These are most recent figures.
Yes, they are.
What's my one?
This data shows our local solar generation. So this is data pulled from city permits about from solar installations that are going on rooftops. So that's kind of cool data. 2024, I don't think this had updated, so I don't know how late into 2024. 2024 is low because it's not the full data year. And it seemed to me like it was probably not updating even through like when I pulled this a few weeks ago. So I'll check into that, but just know that we have that data. We can see how much we're adding. That target number was just a target that we actually set during the first climate action plan of what we thought was like a reasonable estimate of how much to drive, and you can see that we're smashing that target. So that's good to know that, there is a lot of opportunity there. And then this graph shows greenhouse gas emissions broken down. This is from our 2021 inventory. It's similar to the electricity and natural gas data that we looked at, but this is total emissions and then how they're stacking up together. So you can see residential contributing, you can see the breakdown between electricity and natural gas and other fuels for emissions in both residential and commercial in this graph. This is our inventory. And then the last one we have is solar that the city generates. So the 3 data years we have were selected because they're the years that we have brought new additional solar on. So once the Juniper Ridge solar goes in, we would add a new column for 2025. The exciting thing is that the Juniper Ridge solar is 600 kilowatts, and we have right now a total of 350. So we're going to almost triple our total solar Juniper Ridge campus.
So this is
It's just
installed capacity, not generation. It's kilowatts, not kilowatt, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good catch.
I was just looking at it and I wasn't sure if it was an incomplete data year, and I assumed based on the bottom that it was a cumulative capacity thing, but
Yes, it's
the title
capacity.
didn't match. It was referenced in the local solar generation as
Yeah.
kilowatt finalized.
Yeah. We should be able to add a chart that also shows the generation, because we do
Mhm.
have dashboards for each of them.
What's the date for the city target?
I can't remember from the CCAP what it was.
Okay.
It might have just been, I can't remember what our
Okay.
thinking was on it. The CCAP was sort of like a 2020 to 2025 plan, but I can't remember when we made that target, if that was just like total for the life of the CCAP or not. Okay, so that's the data that we have. Are you guys, do you have anything else you guys want to talk about, or do you want to dive into discussing the actions?
Digesting them.
It's our new public works campus.
How much renewables over total?
I think solar array on top of that building.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Like how close are we to our goals?
Right.
Like, I don't think it's in the fire area, general zone.
I think the
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I don't know how that plays into this data, if that just shows up as negative consumption.
Cassie, do you have a sense of how close we are to our goals?
Well, we have just the inventory
Yeah.
from 2021.
So what?
You mean our greenhouse gas emission goals
Well, just in terms of reaching 100% renewables.
in the energy supply?
Yeah. Like close.
I don't know what the latest data is right now on Pacific Powers. We could look that up. I just haven't looked it up recently. I guess, are you asking as a whole? Are you asking?
I mean, I think it's
the whole, or are you asking specific to one of those actions and one of those targets?
Well, I think it would be helpful to know, overall of the energy supply. We sort of know generally the breakdown between CEC and Pacific Power. But then as that feeds into the city and we're putting solar on different places and other things, do we have, is there any sort of inventory that's here's how we're doing against getting to 100%?
Not specifically to that strategy, no.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something we could look at doing.
Okay. But in our last inventory, we just didn't calculate it in that way.
Well, we calculate how many emissions are coming. We didn't calculate towards a target of 100% renewable. We just
Okay.
calculated the total emissions that are generated.
Okay.
We know that they went up,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question and a good flag on how we want to. We haven't done a lot of work on tracking any of these things very much. Like the data that we have is what we've shown you here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's definitely something we need to improve and something that I'm hoping we can do with our new staff person.
Okay. I think that'd be interesting to see.
And then, I'm also curious, especially since the way as we're talking, kind of transitioning into goals, the way that the goal was listed in here is installing solar on all city facilities.
Mhm.
And so I guess knowing where that 710 number came from in terms of capacity and like how this relates, since we haven't really talked about those, like
Yeah,
those interim targets, I think that would also be helpful to know.
yeah.
And similarly, and this is maybe some of what you were asking as well, is just how does our rooftop solar goal play into the data that we have here? Is this electricity consumption data in like net of the solar generation that's playing into it? Or
Would be because, like what we're consuming would be, if the solar was not added to homes, there would be that much more.
right. So just seeing that representation, because we're, talking about energy supply, that's and it's
Like you-
weird because solar kind of acts as an efficiency measure in this kind of data because it's just drawing down the total number more than a generation component.
Yeah.
That does,
Mhm.
it's kind of a roundabout way of thinking
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, and that's just how we do it here.
So you're saying like it would be helpful to almost see.
Like a bar on top of
Like
additional
off-
solar
off-
generations. Yeah.
Like what's been displaced.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And we can do some of that. I think keeping in mind, anytime you like really try to get really specific data,
Mhm.
often costs a lot of time to
Mhm.
do. Sometimes the data is available, sometimes it's not. Like you could model what you think that would be, but it's not like we're not going to get modeled, data from households.
Right.
and what
Well,
they actually generated.
And we don't do that, like Washington doesn't, they have a net metering policy, but they separately meter generation and consumption. We don't do that in Oregon, so you're never gonna
Yeah,
get perfect
exactly.
numbers. My
Yeah.
parents' inverter has not been connected to Wi-Fi since it's been
Yeah.
created, so the data.
Yeah, so I think we could
But-
definitely dig in a lot more than we have, but some data might not be available, and then there's
Yeah.
just the opportunity cost of spending like a lot of staff time
Right.
tracking down data than doing projects, which is one of the main reasons
Mhm.
we didn't even do any sort of reporting. Like the
Right.
data we have was the first time we've done that.
Yeah.
Mainly because
Yeah.
capacity issue, but definitely something that has been it's a goal for mine with our new staff person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just that piece is relevant to the goal setting process of knowing, like, I don't know, the relative scale
Yeah.
of what piece of this puzzle are we trying to deal with community wise and city operations wise with our own one-to-one, whether it's rooftop or like, the general rooftop category. And then also like with the state policy wise, like this is how our grid mix is changing. And if we're relying on state policy, like that's the thing that we're tracking and following.
Yeah.
And we, I think that piece is relevant to the bigger picture. And I'm trying to recognize like what's the kind of minimum viable level of that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it needs to be, an audit worthy
Yeah.
piece, but just big picture wise.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. Okay, you guys ready to switch gears?
Yeah.
Okay. What we're gonna do now is I'll put it up on the screen so we can all kind of track. And we can just walk through, since we didn't have new actions, we're just gonna walk through each of these and talk through each one and see what thoughts and edits you guys have to them. And then I think we'll also have time at the end, or in that discussion, we may come up with new separate actions too. So the first one, and this is of course like the biggest one to discuss always, but provide 100% renewable electricity supply to the community. I changed this from how we had it written before, the actual action, to saying provide 100% renewable electricity supply to the community by working with electric utilities, state agencies, and other partners to transition to renewables on the electric grid. Because that was just trying to catch, be a catch-all of all the different ways that you can try to influence the energy supply on the electric grid.
Is this the one that used to be specifically about the community green tariff?
It never was about the community.
Or-
In our minds, the community green tariff was the mechanism. The action didn't call it out because that wasn't a thing yet when we passed
see.
it. It was the language was just, it was like develop a roadmap to achieve 100% renewable
Okay.
electricity supply. At the time, the state law had not been passed. The community green tariff was kind of a very nebulous idea.
And there are some other pathways.
There were other
being looked
pathways.
at
So
that would have required state policy and implementation as well.
yeah, so at the time we were working with Pacific Power, I kind of just like individual to our community and trying to figure out a way that we could do that. Some of the pathways Pacific Power thought didn't even require state legislation. So so that was kind of part of that. Is at the time we were like trying to map out these are the options to do that. And then what changed since then is that we got the state law establishing those targets. They established the community green tariff because the PUC thought that some of the things that Pacific Power thought they could do without explicit, state legislation, they were like, no, you can't actually do that. So then the community green tariff was kind of created as the tool for people.
I see.
The update for that now is that PGE had been the one kind of leading the charge on developing that. They were working with communities that were really interested, like kind of the most motivated communities. They were working on developing that. I followed the conversations for a while, but not the most recent ones. But just effective like a month or two ago, PGE has decided that they're not going to pursue that program at all, and they're not intending to file a tariff for it. With the primary reasoning being that I think they couldn't see a way of making that program that didn't come at like a very high cost. And if it comes at a very high cost, like no one was really interested in it anymore. So I don't know exactly what
To the community.
to the community members. Like it would just be a really high, such a high premium.
Mhm.
And I just heard that update from another city just in the last like 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm not exactly sure what the next steps are related to that. So anyway, that's kind of like,
Yeah.
we're a little bit at square one with like a community,
Other than
procurement,
other than having a state law, just
which we have. Yeah.
good.
Right.
Yeah.
Rory sent, I think, an interesting,
yeah.
article. I thought that was really interesting. I think he
Yeah.
sent it to the 3 of you.
I don't remember seeing it,
But
but the Pacific Power IRP not
it was,
aligning with.
yeah, it was like a summary that the Citizens Utility Board wrote up, like just a long
Yeah.
blog post kind of unpacking that and how they're just not on track to meet their targets. So. Yeah. Anyway.
I mean, that's also just like good to flag in how you have this written out too, because that would be another opportunity. Like if with this being the goal for the city to say like, we're relying on this goal too. And so participating in those conversations,
Yeah.
I think is a way that this could show up.
Yeah, exactly. So do you guys feel comfortable with this language since it's kind of broad in that way?
I think it's broad. I'm still like, what is our implementation pathway? Like
Yeah, yeah,
which I feel like in our last conversation, I think we have a lot of ideas on what those implementation pathways could be. This one, I'm like, does anyone have ideas? Because it feels like we've tried some things and they're not.
I know this one's hard
Happening.
because it's just so much out of our control. Like we ultimately have zero control on the electricity supply. Control, we have ways we can influence it and those ways to influence it and what the right way is to influence it changes depending on what's happening, with the regulators and the state. And so we've just been tracking that closely and we have been participating in all of those. So,
I mean, do we want to make this more specifically actionable by saying identify opportunities to advocate or something? Like, do we want to add something that's more specific to, or like acknowledges the fact that to do this, there needs to be some, like, there's some work to identify short-term and long-term steps and like what external factors may change those steps over time.
That's what I'm trying to think about.
Yeah, it's sort of like whether that's advocacy opportunities or, you know, a resurgence of something like the community green tariff.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
never know.
And it feels to me almost more like a keeping track of things
Mhm.
as opposed, because it really has changed like every, depending on the context.
So
So
it does seem like to Neil's point, like the IRP or clean energy plan engagement would be like the most obvious advocacy
yeah,
Mhm.
opportunity.
yeah.
Yeah. Which is a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Like, what if we added something about, is the advocacy like the missing piece? Or, I mean, to me, like, as it's written to me, it gives me as a staff the direction to be like tracking those things, identifying them and trying to do them. So I don't think that in terms of like, I just don't know that. I guess to me, it's covered. So I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything that you guys would want to make sure that we're doing as part of that.
I think the piece that I struggle with in the framing is when this was originally written, it was like, there's all these potential options. We don't know exactly which one, but we're like, this felt like, you know, that broad thing was like, we're going to do it. We as the city are going to do this for our community. And now I think with those actions, we like have more of a pathway and have more of that opportunity, but it feels less actionable, and that goal like is stronger than I think it likely will actually be. If that makes sense? Like,
Impact of it.
right, yeah, like if you were just reading the high level summary and you're like, sweet, we're providing 100% renewable energy to the community. And like the way that we modeled that was like with that net impact.
Yeah.
And so I think with where we're at and where we think things are actionable, the things that I'm struggling with is how much you tie into like, this is the action step that we think is doable right now, while still leaving the opportunity open for like, turns out a lot of stuff changes.
Yeah.
As we learn through this process. The context changes, the opportunities change. So how you balance those things, because I think squishy goals are also rough when you say like, we're going to work to support a transition to cleaner ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, it's just not.
Yeah.
What is the actionable step right now? Would that be the advocacy and making sure? Because to me, it's like the pathway right now, like they are under state law to do this by 2040. And even an 80% reduction by 2030 would be massive. That's only this way.
Yeah.
So the pathway, from my perspective,
is like making sure it happens.
Is making sure that they just do that.
Right.
So maybe it's not like support, it's like ensure.
And maybe
Like-
that would be like the way we could change this action would be just focusing in on like, okay, the implementation path that we're taking, that this CCAP is assuming we're taking, is that they're complying with the state law, you know? And so like taking out the fact that we're going to like work with these groups. It's like, we're waiting to see if they comply, and we're going to make sure that they comply. So maybe the action is more about like something about making, you know, tracking progress towards the House Bill 2021 targets and participating in opportunities to
advocate
for,
Our goals.
yeah.
would you need a separate either sub action or a separate one for co-op customers? Since they're not subject, I mean, they're much further towards 100%, but they're not 100%.
Yeah. That's a good question. We've not, yeah, we haven't really, there's
mean,
such a
you-
small fraction that we kind of not worried about it, but if we wanted to make sure we are tracking that, I would think we would call that a separate action under ES1.
I think, yeah, the priority is probably the larger utility
Yeah.
with less renewables already.
But I think there's that, like, if you have it broad enough or specifically called out, then, you know, as
Making sure as you have
As-
time, yeah.
you have time, and also like that's where they're at right now, but because they don't have a mandate,
It may
contracts can
yeah.
change and
Yeah.
they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see your hand. I'm just not exactly sure how we're supposed to do this.
Yeah, we just have so much to get through that I really would, like I said at the beginning, we could just hold discussion from the public until the end. We don't have public comment, scheduled in this meeting.
Yeah, said one more quick question.
Okay, we can do one now, but it's, we just can't do more.
You're talking about advocacy and, part of the reason I'm here is the proposed electricity ordinance, the city council considered that be something you could support.
That's just, that's
I
not,
guess that's the type of thing you would or wouldn't support, I guess is what I'm
what do you mean by support?
advocating for. You're asking how you reach this goal, whatever is electrical energy.
It's 100% renewable electricity. So we're talking about the supply utilities are providing as opposed to electrification of appliances. That's what the action we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
It's just renewable.
Yeah.
electricity, not electricity in general,
Yes.
Correct, yeah,
Yeah.
separate strategies.
like renewable electricity we have, the more possible that becomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. So I think, does that sound like the right approach to rewriting it to being like, because I think it's a good point. It's like, we don't have the implementation pathway, but just being honest about that, like, this is what we're doing, because
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And maybe in 5 years, when we update this again, like, we'll have a lot more information about how that's going, since that's
Yeah.
when they're coming up on their first targets.
You could even put language in there in terms of like adapt advocacy focus as pathways, like as
Yeah.
external factors change. Yes. Build yourself some, adaptive management.
Okay, I'll think about it. Do we want to add a separate action related to the co-op?
I guess you could even add a clause to what I just added in terms of like including shifting focus towards what are they, a co-op or a municipal utility?
Co-op.
Co-op, yeah. To include co-op as needed or something.
I just feel like since this one's gonna be primarily about House Bill 2021, I just
We
wonder.
could have we could also have a separate one. I feel like if we make it a separate one, it's gonna get deprioritized in the short term.
Well, yeah,
Maybe that's okay.
Mhm.
some
I-
things have to be
I think, yeah,
prioritized.
like right now, nothing's actionable, so you can deprioritize, it has such a negative connotation, but
Right.
it's not a priority right now, because there's
But,
not anything
like,
actionable.
I think it's just like keeping it on our radar
Yeah.
is maybe the thing.
What if
we
it was
wanna
like
do.
investigate opportunities to, like, do we know what these, I haven't really, do we know what the opportunities are to even affect the supply for CEC?
I think there was question. There's very little in terms of state legislation, just in general. They're usually not included intentionally, and then at some point there's questions of whether that's a good thing or not. But
It seems like it's a larger issue for co-ops that are seeing significant load growth.
right,
Because that's forcing them to look at other supply.
Yeah, which may be
options.
true here.
That could happen.
yeah,
Yeah. So maybe it's just sort of, I don't know what the formal language would be, but basically like keep an eye out for opportunities or cause to advocate or like
right.
work more.
For renewable
closely with
opportunities.
ECC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you think investigate options is not the right language for that?
well, that, it is fine.
Or like
I think it's,
explore
but it's more like
opportunities.
horizon scanning, like,
Mhm.
Explore opportunities. It's like, it's keeping track of.
it's key. Yeah.
These are the 4 ways I can start a goal.
Or it's like, as, yeah, I feel like
Engage
it's-
with.
Yeah. Maybe it's engage with, CEC to make sure we know if there's changes that warrant more. I guess those all make it sound like it's something we're gonna do right away. And so
Yeah.
I was trying to think of language that would help us build in the like,
Like when it becomes
It's like-
relevant.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think and I think it's probably like a good thing to be like, have, regular conversations with them. Maybe that's every 6 months, like,
yeah,
what's happening, what's your mix? Are you growing,
Yeah.
what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, because the immediately actionable step might be just
opening the
connecting with them,
conversation.
figuring out what they're doing in terms of
Mhm.
growth, if they are experiencing a lot of growth because of the areas that we're, expanding out into and what they think based on the city's growth plans and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Okay.
And like if there are opportunities for the city to help them, to help them put more renewables on, like,
Yeah,
great.
to figure out that one too. Do you guys want to move on to the other ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So this one was work with the gas utility to establish a natural gas offset program for community gas use. The plan had been at the time that Cascade Natural Gas would create an offset program similar to what renewable
Northwest Natural.
sorry, what they were offering to their customers. I know the thinking has evolved on this topic a lot in that time. So I'm curious how you guys want to evolve this strategy. And I guess the
This was
update
also
on that is that
before
I
the
believe
CCP.
before the CPP, I believe that Cascade Natural Gas, even with the CPP, they're still planning on offering this, and at least in the most recent exchanges I've had with them, which were frequently up until about a year ago, and they've been less in the last year. They're establishing one for Washington, and they were going to do that first because Washington State was requiring them to, so they had specific requirements, and their plan was to just expand that program or make it available to Oregon customers too. But I do not know the latest update on that.
This is another area where we could quickly get into the natural gas conversation.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm like, how deep do you want to go, or do you want to save some of that for tomorrow in that project?
Do you have just, does anyone have any like big picture, like directionality thoughts on this topic?
I think it needs an overhaul. Is my general sense, but I think what that overhaul looks like depends on what we hear through the natural gas
Okay,
process.
okay, and would you go as so far as to saying we want to potentially just remove this action and then probably put a different kind of action in its place? Because we're not going to know what the conclusion is of the
Mhm.
electrification project, even in time to bring this to the whole committee. I think we could say, we don't want to do this because we're pretty like, if this is what you're thinking, this is not the direction that we want to go. The electric, we'll replace it before the very end of the project with something else, but we don't have it now because we're doing a deeper discussion on that in a parallel process. Is that the right way, or?
I'm curious what you two think.
I would prefer that to like leaving this here. I think there's a lot to discuss and opportunities. And this is interesting because it's like in supply and there's like so many things, but I think opportunities to think about how renewables could offset gas, or however we're gonna talk about it, that are different than like
Like an
really
offset.
developing it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, I think, anyway, I think we should wait until.
Yeah,
we have
the
some more
offset
conversation.
program isn't necessarily the most, like, it's definitely not the only path to reducing natural gas emissions from community gas use. Like there's, whether it's reducing natural gas use or alternative fuels or, you know, whatever
Mhm.
you want to open that, there's just, yeah, I think sort of jumping straight to, we would definitely want this thing to happen as a priority is, there's a different landscape now.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think I prefer things that are more have a more direct and tangible impact, like you were kind of mentioning. So whether that's reducing the gas use through different mechanisms or some like in intentional program that's talking about displacing in some different way rather than, and my understanding of this was that there was this offset program was open to more non-direct offset opportunities of like, which just all of a sudden you lose some potential for additionality and there's a little bit more mushiness in there that
You mean like tree planting type things? Is that what
Yeah.
you're- Yeah.
Or yeah,
Yeah.
and it can be better, you know, whatever. There's lots
I
of
just
different
meant-
versions of that, but just general offsets as opposed to direct things that are either working on direct reduction of gas consumption in general are something that I prefer. And so I think there's potentially an opportunity to, or I'm also in support of removing this for now. I think there could be potentially on how we end up writing the first component of this, and this is just weird because of the weird limbo status of the CPP. But I think there's also potentially like a parallel version of our support in ES1A
That's true.
that we could do on the gas side for ES2A or whatever that is, and also opportunities for direct engagement with the CPP process for depending on how it gets set up, because we again don't know
Right.
how the chips will land, something, I don't know. Fall. Chips fall?
Yeah.
Whatever those things are. There might be some actually very specifically actionable things we can do to try to support projects happening in our community.
Yeah.
And those types of things. And so I want to, I guess I kind of see those as two separate things to
Yes.
backfill this section. One being things coming out of the gas conversation, the electrification conversation, sorry. And then the other is, and whether we need a placeholder for this or not, how we're engaging and how we're promoting those things once we know the answer to that, because it's pending, but it's a lot closer than some of these things have been in the past iterations of the CCAP.
And I remember when I first joined the energy work group and was reading this, and I saw this one, and I was like, we should change this to be something about implementation of the CVP. So
Yeah.
I fully agree with Neil that that's the most natural.
I wonder
Place.
if,
Yeah.
I think, your point about how it may just be sort of similar to the first strategy makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if like, because when we were doing this, this was the only specific gas strategy, and it was like specifically about this offset program. Do you think the strategy would be something broader, like reduce natural gas consumption in Bend, and then maybe there would be multiple actions, one of them being whatever relationship to the CPP, but another one being if there are additional local things that we can do on top of that.
Yeah, it's
Or
funny
maybe
the way that,
some of those, maybe the other local things would fall into different,
right.
like for renewable electricity, we have it separated out, but I just wonder if like, it seems like the
It's also like
strategy
weird
level-
here too, I think, a little bit.
It's what?
Supply, like,
Well,
I
right.
mean, because it's kind of like
I think,
we're talking about reductions, but it's like not, anyway.
but a reduction of gas use doesn't necessarily, it's yeah, the supply versus energy use, there's like
There's,
we're in this weird middle ground.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that I was as soon as you said that, I was like, well, does that belong in this conversation or the other conversation? It's like, it's
Yeah.
kind of, if it's broad, it could go in lots of different places. But the big important goal there is reducing our reliance and usage of natural gas. And so I think like we just need to recognize that, like maybe it's in the actions. If it's something that's that broad, maybe those actions have like a little star that says this action shows up in both of these places.
Yeah.
Due to like the fact that some of these solutions are going to be nuanced or show up in multiple places, and then we can have one cohesive strategy rather than it being more fragmented.
Yeah.
Because we're not specifically talking right now in this conversation or in the opportunities that we know of right now, specifically about a lot of natural gas, or like methane alternatives hasn't like really been a solution that we've been talking about right now. That's the thing that would fit the most neatly into this category. But I think having the broader piece that can cover both of those would be helpful.
Which I think the CPP stuff, the CPP would fall under supply because that really is just about decarbonizing the existing supply regardless of the amount of that supply.
well, you
Right.
can meet CPP targets by decarbonizing supply or reducing use.
Right.
Yeah.
Both will get you towards that. It's an emissions-based
Yeah.
Yeah.
reduction, which I was like, do we want it to be about reducing natural gas use? Do we want it to be about emissions somehow? Yeah.
Do we want to try to define a strategy or maybe we just wait on the strategy until we know what actions we're talking about to
I mean, I liked Neil's reducing like reliance and usage of natural gas is like the more of like a top line.
But
And
is
then I
that,
think
but
the
I
bottom-
think then that like, is that less of a supply? You know, I know it's hard.
All right, well, I'm
No, I like, I mean, I'm
I mean,
fine.
if
I'm
you
fine with
wanted
that
to keep
too.
it higher level, you could say reduce emissions associated
Associated
with
with-
reliance and usage of natural gas.
Yeah.
That leaves it a little more open-ended.
Because then that,
As terms of how much comes from supply and how much comes
Right.
from use.
and it also allows, because the CPP as one of those mechanisms does both of those things, it's a clear.
And so I think we should add a bullet about CPP implementation.
Are you familiar, is anyone familiar with the timeline for the CPP update?
They're hoping, well, I think many are hoping that it will be reinstated by the end of this year.
Okay, because it would be good if we knew that before we like actually finalize like the
Yeah.
CCAP, which
Yeah.
will happen now.
I mean, the public comment period is open now, so they proposed draft rules and the comments are open through the end of the month. It wouldn't go in the plan, but if we wanted to advocate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we don't have a full ECC meeting during the comment period to discuss whether the city wants to comment.
Yeah,
That's a sidetrack,
yeah.
but
Protection for.
yes.
That's a state.
Okay. So I think that's probably as far as we're gonna get on this topic right now.
Mhm.
The next big one is encourage solar and other renewable energy generation on residential and commercial buildings. We did a lot of work, Neil, last week on how we're like these in the energy and buildings groups. I'm assuming we'll wanna mirror some of that where it feels relevant here too.
In terms of like the programmatic approach. we're
all the
talking about.
programs too.
Develop programs.
Yeah.
It is interesting, the headline says specifically on buildings, even though we have in here like community solar projects, which wouldn't necessarily be rooftop,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
I feel like other like sort of infill locations, community solar.
Yeah.
I don't think that's stopping anybody from
Yeah.
anything, but a clarification we could make.
yeah, we could change the strategy.
In the residential and commercial sectors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's, we're probably not wordsmithing right now, but
Or you could just add and through community solar projects or something.
mhm.
Well, I'm trying to think if there's other examples of like standalone renewable energy projects. We have a
That
few of
would be
those.
like small to medium size.
Yeah.
Utility scale, but aren't.
But we have that separately. So I think, because we have that, we kind of called that out like separately here.
For one specific project.
But yeah, one specific project.
Also the Outback,
Outback's not in here.
right?
Yeah. So I almost wonder, like, I think community solar being incorrectly placed here, but I almost think that this strategy was meant to be like rooftop solar,
Mhm.
distributed
Got it.
rooftop. So it makes me wonder if,
We need a separate, or we need to broaden ES4.
yeah, I almost wonder if ES4 should be like pursue, like,
Yeah.
I don't know what
Local
scale you
renewable
call it.
energy generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
ES4 to me reads as like you had ES4A first and then you made,
Mm-hmm.
because that was the only
Yeah, because that was the thing.
thing you think of that was topical at the moment.
Like pursue, maybe that's as simple
I
as it
think
could
maybe
be.
that's it. Yeah.
And then,
Oh, just kidding, I have that on there.
what are you looking for?
I've always thought that ES4 was just the wastewater treatment facility. I didn't think the water reclamation was in that.
No, it was always just water reclamation.
Right, the biogas thing.
Oh,
But I didn't, did you change it to add hydropower or?
well, it's funny because I'm looking at it now and I said wastewater treatment facility. I must have meant water treatment facility, right? Like wastewater treatment facility and the water reclamation facility are the same thing.
Oh, water reclamation, yeah.
The water
Water.
treatment facility.
Yeah,
I can't remember. So I did change this one in general
Okay.
when we did our refining in like June or something.
okay,
And now I can't remember if,
Down below it has water filtration and then.
oh yeah, so I did.
and
That's
reclamation.
right.
Yeah.
I added that.
Okay.
When we refined them.
okay,
Yeah,
That-
so that's new. That's why it looks new.
yeah,
But I think, what did I just do?
that also is.
Oh, because I need to
Make it red.
kind of cut this. I was gonna move,
Hmm.
the community solar down to here.
And I feel like we should put some sort of cross-reference in the community solar one around solar for all.
Solar,
Or just,
solar for all is gonna
No,
be
that's the lower
residential,
one,
right?
sorry.
Not-
Yeah,
I mean,
solar
getting
for
the-
all seems more relevant up here.
Yeah.
Does it not have a community solar piece to it?
I think what I've
Is it mostly
heard so
rooftop?
far, it's mostly gonna go to low income rooftop. I
Then maybe
don't
just
think
more
it's gonna go to
generally
the
greenhouse gas reduction fund.
And how does that directly tie to community solar? I'm just not as familiar.
It's basically like a community solar project would be something that could probably qualify for financing
Okay.
from the greenhouse gas reduction fund.
Okay.
And so it's
low cost financing.
the low cost financing.
And the community solar project in Oregon is extremely limited at this point. It's pretty much full, except for a couple of basically nonprofit community solar providers have a little bit more that they can build. That's gonna reach its cap soon, and then that's sort of the end of community solar as for now, unless the legislature like increases those caps. So it's just something to be aware of when we think about community solar as a tool. So like a private company like Shine, they can't do anymore. Yeah. Okay, let's go back up to this one. So this one really is meant to be like rooftop solar. We changed. How do you guys want it? Do you guys want to talk through each of these, or do you want to look at our
Like
energy
mirror
plans
the
and
building,
kind of
mirror
that?
buildings. Basically there, we're like, we need to create a program that incorporates these things, that includes education and incentives and workforce, blah, 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 and like kind of sequencing.
And I think we kept workforce as its own, knowing that it would be something that you would sequence like early in the stage of a program development, but there, we had create new programs. I'll have to pull up exactly how we had, but that was a new strategy. We'd combined the equivalent of C and D.
Yep.
And it was like about creating new financing programs and other financial and non-financial incentives.
Mhm.
And then something at the tip of my tongue. Are you tracking that, Neil, or do you need any of that explained?
I'm not trying.
Okay. So what, for the energy and buildings group, we added a new strategy that was sort of a catch-all of just like creating new programs and really like having a programmatic approach to
Okay.
trying to get, in that case, it was about, people doing energy efficiency projects and electrification projects in their
Mhm.
homes. So we defined one strategy about creating new programs, feeling like that was missing here.
Mhm.
And then we combined. Do you guys remember, was there more that you?
Incentives and financing.
Well, on the new
And
programs.
campaigns, right? Wasn't it also, it was sort
Oh,
of
yeah,
like
because we talked about how like,
focusing on the highest impact things or places where there was lower awareness and sort of like lining it all up, that you would have, a workforce that was ready and the
Mhm.
program structure to like walk people through it, and then doing a sort of campaign being
I
like, we
forgot.
want you to weatherize
Right.
or whatever it is.
And that like the city would take more ownership over the development of the program and whether that ends up going out to an RFP to,
Mhm.
third parties. But it would be like a city program that's like, we're gonna
Mhm.
take action on buildings in these couple of areas.
Okay.
And then like develop the program. So it's sort of saying in this too, like, we want to develop a program around renewables. And then, figure out what that looks like.
and knowing it would
to
have all those
RFP or other
pieces.
stuff.
And so like one of the differentiations we made, I have the other one up on my own computer now, is like that first strategy we have about increasing community education. Because when we talk about education, we've talked both about just kind of like the general, more passive type of education that's on our website and maybe in social media, but then also a different type of outreach, which is more like, it would be more program specific or a specific campaign that's targeted at trying to get like a certain behavior change in a period of time that we're
Yeah.
tracking more closely. And so the thought was kind of by adding the programs part, like thinking of that first one, that increasing community education, as kind of being more of that passive education. And then a program would also have
I
like
gotcha.
outreach
That's
and
the
education.
piece.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
included in it. And then that's where like even the workforce development is part of that, because thinking that if you're going to be for many of the programs, if you're going to be pushing for a certain thing, wanting to make sure that you have the workforce in place to do that thing. Like if you're trying to promote a certain type of energy efficiency upgrade, and that would have to be part of what you look at when you're developing a program. So the language that we used in energy and buildings was just develop programs that leverage and complement existing programs that encourage residents and businesses to pursue energy efficiency, electrification, and other emissions reduction upgrades, such as an energy navigator program. And I'm wondering if we want to.
Use similar language and maybe
Mhm.
even with a reference.
Exactly. So
That's what we ended up doing in all of our prioritization, was combining things together anyway. So
this would be like develop programs that leverage and complement existing programs that encourage residents and businesses to pursue renewable energy.
Yep.
yeah.
Do we want
Are
to
we talking specifically
solar?
about solar?
This strategy, well, I think, yeah, we changed it to solar and other renewable energy generation. Do
There's
you guys feel strongly about
I think that
having it broader than solar.
in my mind, I don't think you're missing a ton of opportunities in the residential and commercial space in the renewables besides solar, but I think that the
You should-
space that does is solar and storage,
Yeah,
and that
and we did sort of talk about that.
and that has shown up in a couple of other places, but they're often paired together. And they're like, yeah, they're technologies that are paired together.
Okay.
So
we'll say to pursue renewable energy projects.
That doesn't
Or-
explicitly include battery storage, though.
yeah,
So I'd say and storage.
Projects.
sure. I hate it when people say sure. Yes. Hell yes.
Affirmative.
Do you want this or this? Sure, either. Good.
And how. We changed in the buildings group, the B to being, not just promoting incentives, but basically increasing education and promoting incentives for this group. So kind of separating like community education, which is focused on broad community versus
Uh-huh.
targeted education. So if we were
Builder,
for builders and contractors, so if we wanted to use similar language. It would be. Develop and deliver outreach and education. For. And available incentives. In the buildings one, we said specifically like on high performance building, would there be like an equivalent? It said, develop and deliver outreach and education about high performance building to this target audience. Would we just say on renewable energy
yeah.
relevant to that audience? Okay.
They had to get it on there. What's available?
Renewable energy
And
target
storage.
and storage. We did that, and we added in contractors, builders, developers, and contractors. So does that feel like the right approach for this one as well? We. The language that we used about the financing programs and creating new incentives. So Neil, this one is just,
We need a like decoding of what we.
well, it's basically the same as our creating incentives one.
But what I like about this one, and we could talk about this more, is like permitting,
Right.
could fall
This
under
is
this.
the non-financial incentives is an important.
We did also in the energy and buildings group, we specifically, even though it's really a subset of incentives, we did call out exploring permitting processes for opportunities to incentivize. So is that something?
Well, I think this is more like, how do you speed up solar permitting? Which I don't know how much that's an issue in Bend yet, but it's like, hey, we want to start doing a lot more of this. Like, how do we make sure there's like good processes
Mhm.
to make sure things are permitted quickly and not being held up and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's
it's-
still permitting processes. So there's different ones.
Or, yeah, I don't know, that could be. Reducing soft costs is something people talk about in solar renewables, but that might be too specific. But just like removing barriers seems too broad, but does like
Yeah.
open up those opportunities.
Yeah.
Because really those are all relevant pieces of that.
So do we not think we need the specifically exploring permitting processes for this one?
I mean, yeah, this is where it goes back and forth. They could fit into the non-financial incentive.
It does fit. That was my case. That's the case I was trying to
Or
make.
should we
the
just
other
put
one.
including permanent? Oh, right, because I think we wanted to keep that one because we thought it would be a nice specific thing that we could check off was,
That we could
The
make
permit.
progress on.
yes,
I think
that's what.
I see them as together.
Yeah.
I think it was just not wanting to lose that
Uh-huh.
specific
Mhm.
opportunity. I think we could, I'm fine keeping it. I think it sort of makes sense to keep them the same in
Yeah.
both strategies unless you see solar as fundamentally different. Like if there feels like there's fundamentally more opportunities in building a new building than just putting solar up, which there might be because there's a lot more permits in a new building.
Mhm.
So maybe that's reason enough why it's like more relevant to keep separate in the building.
There's so much more competition. Like,
In a project? Or,
in like building permitting versus like solar permitting.
oh, right. Well, solar permitting, I think, is a pretty distinct, it's like a kind of
Yeah.
weird isolated piece that's its own beast, that's not the same as like a general electrical permit or,
Mhm.
you know, whatever those other pieces are.
Yeah. So we can keep it separate, or we can just add a note up here that says like, including, which is sort of like, yeah, what we did with the Energy Navigator program, and we have something we're highly interested in.
I'm kind of curious. I like that we have it flagged right now. I'm kind of curious, like in our development process, having it like this allows us to explore, like, are there a lot of opportunities here? Like, like I think a tiny bit of
Yeah.
high level research with just talking to the permit office and some contractors.
Yeah.
If it feels like there's a lot of opportunity there, keeping it separate is great. And then if not, if it's tied into other things, then it could be like, if opportunities present themselves, we can improve things, but it doesn't need to be called out specifically. So I feel
Keeping it separate.
keeping it separate at this stage of development. And then if it ends up that we want to combine them, that's fine.
Right.
But I think we could potentially find it being important or not over the time between now and then.
Okay.
All right.
So
It
it's
might
like no
also,
research.
I guess I'm just wondering, in our new ES4, if there's a corollary permitting piece, and I don't even know, like, would that get to county jurisdiction or would those all stay city?
No, I mean, it really depends what project you're talking about, where it is, what it's doing. There's a lot of county permitting relevant for the in-conduit hydro project at the Outback for sure. But that's just ours. I don't know about the water reclamation facility. We haven't gone as far on that topic. But I'm thinking about like, the county is, if we think about non-city owned projects too, there could be, depending on what they are, like if you were gonna try to build. Yeah, it would just depend.
Yeah, I mean, if we just even bigger picture, there's the state rulemaking process going on at DLCD right now that will give counties hopefully a path to identify least conflict areas for larger scale solar siting.
Oh, that's cool.
So, is there some action about like encouraging the county to like adopt this program to prioritize like streamlined permitting for least conflict areas? But that's more of a county level piece as opposed to a city
Yeah.
level thing.
Yeah.
But it would get to that like promoting development of renewables in a
Yeah.
responsible way that falls within county jurisdiction.
Yeah.
What about adding to kind of get at that rather than being so, because that's like one.
Right, it's
specific
like
thing.
really specific, but I wonder if it's sort of like partner with the county on opportunities to.
Or would it be like, could it again be sort of like, almost like
Oh, like-
participating in advocacy for reducing regulatory barriers for local renewable
Yeah.
energy development?
Yeah.
Does that capture?
Yeah.
Mhm.
To reduce barriers for local energy development. Or like.
Yeah.
You could put like a note in there and with like that there's like potential county nexus.
Yeah.
I don't have to wordsmith now.
Yeah.
Just note to self.
Is there like a rulemaking page on that? Just so I can
Mhm.
get a little bit more context.
Yeah, the DLCD solar siting.
We still have microgrids in this one. Do we want to pilot microgrid and battery storage projects? Does that feel like it fits in?
We could move that
The
one
bigger
to
one?
4.
Or, yeah, does it feel like it still fits in 3 or 4? The way we have pilot, it feels like it's more of 4 than
Because they're not
encouraging
necessarily
solar
rooftop.
adoption.
You're right. I would agree with that because, and this one, like when we read it, like this one was intended to be like the city building some of these projects.
Mhm.
Has anything been done?
We're doing it at Juniper Ridge. I mean, when I say that, Juniper Ridge is gonna have 600 kilowatt solar array, and it's with a microgrid enabling technology in there, and it's basically battery storage ready.
Yep.
And we've applied for the CREP grant for the battery storage, and if we don't receive that, we'll just continue to look for others. So it's happening there when we're looking at doing the Outback and Conduit Hydro facility that also have a high desire to make that a microgrid, because one of the big value propositions of that project is to be able to continue delivering water
Yep.
in a scenario where there's no power.
Mhm.
I don't know if you would need battery storage for there, since you've got like hydropower as a base load.
As long as there's enough
But we would have to do them.
As long as we still have water.
energy to operate whatever it needs to be operating. You may need like a tiny battery, but
Well, gravity fed, yeah. So,
But like you need power to run
the
wind
controls.
turbines. They like have battery backup because
Yeah.
they're generating power, like, yeah.
pretty sure that would be part of like the microgrid enabling technology that we.
It just gets.
Real wonky.
Cool.
Okay. So our list now is this, community education targeted at the building community, keeping the local workforce development, an action about developing programs, an action about, creating new incentive programs, and then an additional action about looking at the permitting processes specifically for incentive options. And then, so that's what makes up the solar and other renewable energy homes and buildings. Does that feel like a,
Do we want to talk about geothermal?
Not as a energy or not as a,
I don't know what the past conversations about geothermal.
haven't had any, yeah. Like, what are you, can you elaborate on?
This is, I don't have, Neil probably has way more context, but I know there's projects happening to explore geothermal opportunities in the state, which could just provide a lot more. Anyway, it could just supply cleaner energy. But we need to be
Like-
connected to.
Is that like at a building level, or is that?
I think that's mostly talking about like utility scale enhanced geothermal. There's been enhanced geothermal pilots at Newberry that have gotten some DOE funding, and they go through waves of you hearing about them and not.
Yeah.
And I think that's the primary resource that's being explored here.
To be brought onto utility scale.
Yeah, but the projects right now are technology development, not actual generation. So they're talking about the technology of enhanced geothermal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So they're not like immediate opportunities or development opportunities. They're like,
And I think the other pilots that are like, would be more residential scale are replacing gas pipelines with geothermal in like networks to do like whole neighborhoods.
Like district
And that-
energy.
And that, yeah, like that's,
Yeah.
there's pilots in Massachusetts and some other states. I don't know if we want to leave a window to be like, explore opportunities.
Yes. And those are, yeah.
But
And that's like,
Emerging
that's like
technologies.
thermal energy networks.
Yeah.
And that's the weird thing with geothermal, why I like paused, because there's geothermal as a thermal resource that's used to improve the efficiency of something else for space heating. And then there's geothermal for electricity production. And those,
very different.
those are very different.
Yeah.
And which of those two were you talking about? Like the latter?
Well, I think both are things that like could be explored. I think the supply side is probably more toward utility and not as much for the city to think about. The like district or whatever you want to call it, geothermal networks are more city related, but it's very early. So I don't know.
I mean, that could be an
It's really
energy
interesting,
supply
but-
of just like thermal energy opportunities. And that could mean, even if it's not geothermal, that could mean district heating opportunities in redevelopment sites.
Yeah.
and other opportunities like that of co-locating,
Yeah.
things together. So that's like, that's talking about thermal energy supply, which could fit either into this category or an energy use category, but
I mean,
um,
could
I would
have an
think it would go-
emerging technologies bucket here
Uh-huh.
where that could go. Um,
Or
I'm just
in
think, I noticed.
CS4.
I would
in-
think it would go in ES4
Yeah.
as like explore,
yeah,
Yeah,
would you not call it like? The simplest way for me to think about it is like exploring district energy opportunities. Would you call it? Does that,
I think that's probably fine.
like, I feel like what you were talking about sounded like it was broader. I just am not as familiar with the other locations.
I think I think we can call it just district heating.
that's
trying to-
probably the piece that it makes the most sense for the city to be looking at.
Right.
As opposed to like the
It's a different scale.
the utility scale stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much.
Explore the potential. I kind of want to keep it high because we're like, we definitely would be very early stage in whatever that exploration was.
Mhm.
Would you say explore the potential for district energy in like new development areas, new or redevelopment areas specifically? Because it's not really something you do and like, you don't really retrofit like an existing
No, but you can.
neighborhood.
That's what they're thinking of applications for.
Right.
Yeah, the sort of like pruning.
The
concept.
promise,
Yes.
the promise of it is to be able to, like prune
Yeah.
the gas system.
So explore the potential for district energy, just community wide.
I want to say community.
If you say community wide, it makes it seem like one
Yeah.
thing.
Or the potential.
District
for
energy.
projects.
Project development.
Yeah, I do
Oh.
feel like that and some of the alternative fuels, like best practices that were like in the memo, the one that you didn't print out. The best practices memo,
Yeah.
I feel like they had a bunch of stuff around like hydrogen and all the
They
other
did, yeah.
things. And in my mind, I kind of like slotted that into the electrification, natural gas conversation. But it's a little overlapping.
Yeah, and would we call out, because this is, I mean, I guess district energy can be used to provide electricity too. Like, is it specifically something we would use to replace gas use? Do we want to add that here?
Not necessarily, like it's district energy is generally talking about a thermal resource. It's usually heat. There's some kind of cooling opportunities as well, but it's usually talking about heat. So it could be replacing electricity or gas. It's kind of agnostic as to what it's replacing or preventing.
I think we just keep it as is then.
Yeah.
Okay. It's actually come up like a few times in the last couple of months for me, but it never had before then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just toured like a facility when I went up to Vancouver.
Was it the thermal, the heat exchanger in the old Olympic Village from?
So I toured that one in 2019 and
Yeah.
we were actually down in Richmond, which is
Okay.
like the city south
Yeah.
of Vancouver. So it was another one in Richmond.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me because it feels like it's coming full circle with like steam district heat.
Mhm.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
like in New England, I remember in college getting to like tour the steam tunnels.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those like in Making Energy Work symposium in Corvallis this last year, talking about how campuses with
Mhm.
renewable mandates are talking about, because they're usually all built on a district
Yeah.
steam system,
Yeah.
how they're transitioning those systems as they're also trying to decarbonize and get off of gas at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And the opportunities and challenges there.
Yeah.
And they've done cool stuff too. This is a tangent, but it'll take like a second. Where they're like building this giant new, server computing center, and they're using that as the heat source
Oh, yeah.
to then use to heat. So they're like, they got all this money from NVIDIA to do this whole new building, and then that building is the heat source for like the 5 adjacent new buildings that are being built, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with like server
Mhm.
being a new like heat source.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
no one was really thinking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we feel like we're are there other things you guys want to bring up for any of these strategies? We still have to cover the last one, but it's a little bit narrower. So anything for either the encourage solar on homes or just buildings, or local renewable energy generation?
Are there other more distributed hydropower opportunities at the city besides, like, is this just talking, depending on how this is written, it's just talking about Outback?
There's
Versus-
two at both, but that feasibility study we did was was a comprehensive look at our whole
Okay,
water system. And I should update this because Aubrey, they're not as large. they're
right.
smaller
Yeah,
on both Aubrey and Outback.
anywhere there's a pressure
Utility
reducing.
sites,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay,
And I think not all of them were good candidates, but
Uh-huh.
those ones were.
okay,
And I believe we're on track to do the Aubrey one first and fairly soon.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, so just making sure whatever language we have is
Yeah.
open to that.
I'm now jumping to 5.
yeah, if we're ready to move on, that sounds good.
Do we want to put some sort of like date on that one? Like a timeline?
Well, this one was, part of it is that we don't know like when we're gonna add new facilities and not,
But all the public buildings right now have them.
all of the buildings where there was opportunity to have been looked at like 3 times over. If we take out the buildings that we're gonna vacate in the next couple of years, which is the vast majority of them, because we're pretty much moving to centralized a lot of the departments in the Public Works campus, and then the rest of us will go to City Hall. And then what's left is the fire department on 15th. I don't remember off the top of my head why we couldn't do solar there, but when we did our Amoresco project, we looked at all the buildings for solar, and then we had additional funds, and we looked again and then again. So I know that one was discussed, I just can't remember.
Okay.
And then the fire facilities are the other buildings that are city facilities. We don't own those buildings, so it's a little bit more limited. We have some influence over them. And so I know that it was discussed when we did the Amoresco and determined then that we couldn't move forward, which I'm assuming had something to do with the ownership structure. We lease those ones. But those are all the facilities. And I mean, we've got all these downtown ones in Boyd Acres right now, but they're all gonna be vacated.
So then I wonder if it's. Well. These goals. Is just interesting. These like very tangible goals that are here in local solar generation and here aren't like in our high level CCAP goals, but are the things that like have like very clear progress and understanding towards. And if we're adding 600 megawatt or 600 kilowatts to Juniper Ridge, then this goal's done when that project is done. And so I think then it's just a question of, yeah, what's the relevant goal there?
So these are in those targets are in the CCAP.
Okay. But it's not a strategy.
What do you mean?
It says
These
the
are all
strategy is
strategies that work
install
towards-
solar panels on all public sector buildings. It doesn't say install 710 kilowatts of solar.
It does. In the
Oh,
CCAP
okay.
strategies. It's like, it's not written in the language, but
It's
yeah,
okay.
it's in the chart. So there's the action, and then it's like one or two columns over. That's
Okay.
where that's where anywhere where you see it.
I got you.
it was
Okay.
CCAP, and those were targets that we don't refer to them a lot, so it's
Yeah.
not surprising that you like haven't been looking at that, but it is written in there, and it's something that when we redo these strategies, we can reset those.
Yeah, we should
Yeah.
we should up this one.
For sure, we should clearly
Yeah.
up I don't think I don't like us meeting the targets, like for that solar one, that distributed solar that we're meeting. I don't think it means like, oh, then we're good. It's just like,
Right.
setting targets the first time was particularly hard because you just, you
Yeah,
kind of have to
baseline.
make your best guess. Yeah.
Great.
But now we can kind of look at, okay, what have we been doing on average? And then say we want to, like, say, taking the distributed rooftop solar one, if that's how much we've been adding on average per year, like, do we want to set the goal of 20%, more than that or something?
And that was a per year, the 16.
That was per year, yeah. So yeah, is there any other way you want to adapt?
I mean, this
Fine.
seems like. I don't know if it was discussed in the other space and how the CCAP is going to be relating to the city's own goals.
Yeah,
But I'm just thinking of this in comparison to the recommendation that council had asked to formalize around city buildings being electric. If there's a similar paired goal to that or commitment for new or renovated buildings or something like that, that might be.
Well, if the city's leasing, can you have a preference for like buildings with solar or something?
well, we lease the fire stations from the rural fire protection district, so it's
You
a
don't have a
really
lot of
specific,
choice.
yeah.
So
We really don't lease other buildings for.
So the
at
ones
least
that you're
today.
vacating are owned, but you're not going to own them anymore.
The ones we're vacating, we're gonna sell.
Okay.
Or something, I'm not really sure, but yeah.
Do you know what the like scale of the solar project at Juniper Ridge, how that compares to expected usage?
It's almost equal. We can't, in order to qualify as like net zero, according to the Energy Trust, we participate in the past net zero. But they recommend that we would add an additional 100 kW on top of the 600 kW. To like definitely generate as much as we would use each year, but we did, the consultant team, there's a huge team working on Juniper Ridge, but there's, Brightwork Sustainability does kind of like their net zero calculations, and I have the numbers because we used it for our grant application. It was like what they modeled we could generate versus what they estimate we'll use were like almost equal, like the generation range. Anyway, they were basically equal.
Okay.
But close enough that like we can't consider it net zero quite yet.
Well, yeah, and it's in planning, so depending on,
Yeah.
right, there's,
Even like in terms of like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. I guess because we could use less than their
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the modeling was like on day one or if that included fleet electrification that's in any of the planning, since that's also in goals. Like,
Their assumptions were either.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm just thinking of another, like, I guess, category of a goal here would be towards like a percentage of consumption rather than a number of buildings or
Yeah.
a generation capacity.
So we do have in our strategic energy management plan, our policy in there is that we would construct buildings to be net zero.
Okay.
In the resolution that we're gonna bring to council later this month,
Mhm.
we're proposing that as in there as well. I forget the exact language.
Okay.
So that's kind of the goal
Yeah.
that, you know, we'll get their feedback on whether they're comfortable for that.
Yeah.
My thought with like that resolution was like, and I guess kind of calling out net zero is like, if we do have an electricity supply that is 100% renewable,
Mhm.
maybe you can, I don't know. I mean, I guess you wouldn't be net zero. Like, I wanted them to factor in that, like, if we're moving all of our facilities to electric today, and depending on how compliance with House Bill 2021 would go, like, that's not necessarily the whole story with making those buildings have a low greenhouse gas emissions impact. So I'm kind of gonna tie in the solar piece into that discussion. Like,
Okay.
we really wanted to reduce the impact. It's important to do both.
Okay.
And that potentially, as we're calculating the emissions, if House Bill 2021, you know, if the utilities do come into compliance, like, you could maybe say that's a zero emission building if it was all electric and we had zero emission power. But there's just like more uncertainty about what that means and things.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's going to be part of the discussion, but I share that to say that I think that if you wanted to go so far as to be like, put in as much solar as you're going to use, I think that that's aligned enough with the rest of our policies that wouldn't be like radical.
Okay. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
Because this, as is, it's like we could put one solar panel up or two.
but
You know?
Install
Which
solar. to
was a big
match.
deal. I put two
match.
solar panels up at my college and it was a giant demonstration project. So
Yeah.
times have changed.
To match usage. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing that was just going through
Use of solar panels.
my mind in this and those types of goals, I'm trying to think of like what's the like downstream impact of that goal. And one of those goals, when you do have a goal of being net zero, is in right sizing of buildings and doing those efficiency pieces, because you can balance both of those goals at the same time. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like the potential impact of something like that. And then I'm not in this world enough to know, based on the SEM goals that you have and who you're working with in it as consultants, but public facilities also can accomplish a lot of those goals by including a like longer time frame for cost effectiveness and like some of those other like kind of nerdy pieces where you can say like, we're a public facility, we're building this for 100 years, and so we can use a longer time horizon than
Right.
a private business might be
Which we
using.
did with Amoresco, like,
Okay.
on time, our ROI time horizon was either 20 or maybe 30 years.
Okay, yeah,
Here.
Yeah.
So that's, what enabled all of our Amoresco projects,
Yeah.
is that assumption.
that's great.
Yeah, okay, so we only have 10 minutes. I know that you need to head out. Do you guys feel comfortable with this list, generally speaking?
Yeah.
And then do you want to share just like top one or two priorities? Laura, if you want to go first, since you got to head out.
Oh, it's a good question. There's such a long list. We go back to the top of the list. What did we talk about at the beginning? Yeah, the 100% renewable. I feel like setting aside the natural gas project process, because that's a whole other conversation. Probably that ES1A would be one of my top priorities. And then the programmatic approach. I feel like I want one in each of the categories. I want to try to remember what was in number 4. Maybe the community solar one, just because I feel like, yeah, I feel like I need to learn more about that. But I would pick many more if you weren't making me pick 3.
Yeah.
I have to run.
Oh, no worries.
No.
Thanks so much. Lauren, you have some?
Okay, the first one, policy. I think then I'm. Programs and incentives. You all online.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura. See you soon, or tomorrow, I guess.
One of my questions is around scale a little bit, and I do think, yeah, like understanding how much scale we think we can get out of the things we're talking about in 4, and if like it's much more likely to be like, oh, we can just get a lot more renewables. I want to say with less work in an easier way than like, getting 500 more homes to adopt, blah, blah, blah. I'm sort of I don't have a good sense of that yet, like what the scale of these things are. So I think some of these for me could be like, no, I want to prioritize the water facilities. If it feels like, hey, we could like really focus on that project, get it done, and it's just going to be like, this many more kilowatts we're adding. That's I think a question I have.
Yeah.
That would influence a little bit of my prioritization
Okay. That makes sense.
on like program versus like, hey, let's like get this project done at the city.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think one of the hard things is with a lot of the renewable energy development projects is that it's not as simple as like focus on it and get it done. There's a lot of regulatory barriers. Scale is generally not huge. Like the Outback facility is the largest, probably one of the largest opportunities that we have. And one of the most cost effective, like it's one of the best projects that we have. And it will cover the usage of that facility. It's about a 1 megawatt project.
Yeah.
Which is about the size of the Mirror Pond Dam, which is about 100 homes. That's what Pacific Power says the Mirror Pond Dam does. But I can't remember, I'd have to look at the numbers again, is that facility is such a huge energy user.
Yeah.
That it would primarily offset that facility. There might be some additional too.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Well, in the megawatt, in comparison, it's a megawatt of capacity that's much more continuous than solar is.
Yeah.
And so that megawatt compared to all of the solar projects will be just over a megawatt after a doubling of what we currently have with Juniper Ridge. So that's a lot.
Yeah. Continue it. Yeah.
And it's continuous, which is I don't know what the capacity factor is compared to solar, but significantly more.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, then maybe some of my thinking is like, are there ways that we can support those?
And community solar, I think, could be large, but the biggest issue with community solar is the caps, the state.
And we've done a ton of research there, right? Like, I guess this is again, I feel like I have like all these asterisks which are like, I want to know more. Like what are the things we could be doing to push that forward?
Community solar.
Yeah, because I know so much research thought has been put into that now. Like what else could be done if we were to like focus our attention on it to make it happen?
The main
In a
thing,
timely manner.
the main thing in terms of the city's role has been like finding land and offering that for an affordable, offering that for free or we are doing that right now. We're in discussion to try to get, we've been working with one community solar provider for a long time to try to find different spots. We've like identified half a dozen locations probably. We're working with them. We think we have a location for them. I can't share a lot more details on that right now because I think it's still under development. So that's one example. And then if we were to try to find others, the main thing is I think land is kind of the main thing the city can do. Like other things would be if the city could provide resources to help identify non-city owned parcels of land or that sort of thing. But those developers are typically good at that because that's their business. So it's, and mainly the fact that any of the for-profit companies can't do it anymore is,
Yeah.
there's just only so much.
Okay, well, I'm interested in that too. Can I have 5?
Talked about this.
We did talk.
Neil, what about you?
What are you wanting these stars for?
I just want to know generally for my own thinking about work planning, which ones are rising for you guys as the most important. It's not meant to be like, this is my final vote on you guys
Right.
saying these are what's most important. It's really just kind of information for me as I'm thinking about,
Or like general relevance, not like,
I would say is what you want us to actually be putting capacity and resources for working on. Because you think that they're the best opportunities for us to be working on.
okay. I'm gonna use Laura's caveats and I don't have to waste a star of saying, I'm really glad that we have, like, to have something written down about addressing gas in our energy supply, like, feels really important to me. And so I'm glad that we have that, but because we don't know how that's going to integrate with other things, like we already are addressing that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that that's there.
You don't have to.
But I don't have to use a star unless you want me to, and I'm happy to. And you only wanted one, so and I think I'm intrigued by our a couple of our most recent conversations, the other generation opportunities, the ES4 section, and the district energy conversations that we had. I don't know how actionable or like first step any of those will be.
Yeah.
But I just think I'm as we're talking about it, kind of taking a step back from what we have written right now, I feel like those are things that the progress that is made will feel very tangible. And if framed in the right way, they're things that we have some more control over and could see, I don't know, like bigger shifts related to.
That was these ones, ES4.
ES4 and the 3 ones. I'll put my star on ES4 and on ES1A.
On all of ES4.
Or
Well,
I didn't realize I was looking at
VS4.
no, I was looking at my list because I didn't see.
Like, is there one particular thing that you're interested in, like
Yeah, the A. Yeah,
at the Outback?
yeah. And again, like I'm not gaming the system very well because I know that there's not as much that this process can influence on that, but I do think that it's not something to be ignored.
Yeah.
And then so that's my only star so far, right?
You
Yeah.
said ES1A.
ES1A, and since we're exploring how wait, no, yeah. Then the
We might have another.
okay.
Okay.
Yes, that section. And I'm seeing that we have a note in there about engaging with CEC, but there was also the conversation of how we wanted to, there was the CPP that was in ES2.
Yeah.
ES2,
yeah.
Yeah. And that I want to follow that through, but it doesn't need to be my prioritized piece.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we keep an eye on how how we can be involved in that, because I think that will be tangible and actionable. But there's so much up in the air about it.
Okay. Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.